Okay, so welcome to my test run for mobility and recovery. I'm going to be talking about how to prep yourself for a return to wax and also to be able to recover from workouts and those kinds of things. I think as athletes, we don't tend to think a lot about how do we actually manage our bodies, our joints, our musculature, our tendons, and how do we take care of them, right? I think a lot of the time we have sort of a approach to fighting this, like this almost anime-based approach, which is like, just work hard, it'll be fine. And if you get injured, you're just throwing your shots wrong, so throw them right in the first place. And I don't think that that model holds up very well, right? So I've been fighting for about 20 years. I think when I turned 29, I started having like all kinds of joint tightness issues. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to continue this sport. But I found this series of books that helped me learn how to actually take care of my body, how to stretch correctly, and take care of my joints and recover appropriately. And this has been really indispensable for me in terms of like, I've had a major surgery and I've had to recover from that and all the stiffness, tightness issues that come from that kind of stuff, right? So we've all been forced to take an extended break, right? And we've all kind of maintained varying degrees of physical activity. Like nationally speaking, we're probably all kind of out of shape on some level, right? And that's the breaks. It's a pandemic. Your responsibility is to survive it and also take care of other people. So it's not like a moral failing or something, but we need to understand the best ways to take care of our bodies as we're returning to our sports so that we're not out even longer than we've already been forced to be out. And that's why I think that this was a good class topic, since not a lot of people study this. Not a lot of people study this a lot. So we're looking at a possible return to action fairly soon. Like the numbers are looking better. The vaccines are rolling out. But everybody's going to be super pumped to play. But being out of condition and suddenly increasing your activity by a large degree is a recipe for disaster. And I'm not talking about like body weight necessarily. Like some of us have gained some weight over the pandemic, and that's not as big of an issue as what we're going to be trying to resolving, which is stiffness and mobility issues. So we're looking at prehabbing to prevent those injuries and also how to recover from strenuous workouts, specifically like the first couple, as difficult as they're going to be. So I want to talk about the books that I've read to learn how to do these kinds of things, right? So you don't think that like Tato's a psychopath, you made this stuff up, right? So I've been obsessed with this author since about 2014, 2015. His name's Kelly Storey. This is his main book. It's Becoming a Supple Leopard. He is a classically trained author, right? Becoming a Supple Leopard. He is a classically trained doctor, right? He's not like a witch doctor or some self-appointed guru. He has a traditional physical therapy doctorate. In addition to that, he's also blisteringly funny. Like he's a very entertaining man. I have worked through all of his books. He's also got Ready to Run, which is basically the same material, but like with a running focus. And he also has Desk Bound, which is just more geared towards like office workers and those kinds of things. But this is a good book to skew off of, because essentially what Kelly Storey teaches is that sitting down in a chair is basically the slow death, right? Your body is an amazing adaptation machine, and it will adapt to anything that you throw at it, and that includes sitting down. So basically what happens is, if you sit for long periods of the day, which you're essentially forced to by capitalism, which demands that you will starve to death if you don't sit at your desk and do your job, right? Or pay for a standing desk that's $800 on your own, but that's another topic. So if you sit down all day, what happens is your body adapts to this position where you're like locked over like this, right? And your fronts of your hip flexors shorten, your back rounds, and your shoulders kind of cross forward like this. And this is why kids squirm so much, right? This isn't a natural position for people to try to maintain for long periods of time. There are actually physical changes in your musculature to compensate for holding this position all day. You just don't really think about it because they made you learn to do that in grade school, right? So a lot of the work that we're trying to undo is some of the physical changes that have happened from sitting all day in school and then sitting all day in our jobs, right? And since the pandemic has kind of made it so that we can't go out and do a lot of the same kind of stuff that we used to do, we're probably stiffer than ever, right? Because that physical activity helps maintain that mobility. But if we're kind of sitting all day and playing video games, I've been grinding Smash Ultimate, man. I'm at like almost 2,000 hours. So I've been sitting a little bit more until I bought these standing desks that kind of litter across my room. So what you're worried about is if that stiffness tends to be the thing that creates those kinds of issues. So this leads to, there's a concept called primary motor pathways and secondary motor pathways. So essentially what this means is you have ways that your body is naturally supposed to move. And you have secondary positions that will allow your body to move in the same sorts of ways, but it's in an unstable position. It's strong, but you accumulate a lot more damage for using them. So primary motor pathways, they tend to look like the ends of Olympic lifts. So one of the archetypes is the bench position in the bench press, an overhead position in a shoulder press. There's like a hang position, like when Olympic lifters kind of move from the hang to a clean. Those are both essentially what they're doing is they're switching from this archetypal position of stability from this hang to this cleaned position, right? And they're stable. The bottom of a squat, the bottom of a lunge, the bottom of a pistol squat, which I can't do for the life of me, it's never going to happen. Those positions are stable, which means that you can do those positions almost as much as you want without hurting yourself, right? Because they're using the body in an optimal way. When you incur all of this stiffness from sitting down, inactivity, exercising in a compromised position, your tissues adaptively shorten. So, for example, a bench press, a stable position is with your shoulders back. You're almost kind of like trying to pinch like a penny between your shoulder blades so that the head of your humerus is in the back of the socket. But what a lot of people do when they're challenged or their bench press is overloaded is they actually move their shoulders forward like that to compensate, right? And gain a little bit of extra stability. But at that point, you're not using the structural integrity that you're born with, right? And the mechanical integrity that you're supposed to be using to accomplish that. You're cheating by moving that tension to like more tendons and like shorter muscles, and you're trying to like shorten the pathway, like rounding your back when you deadlift instead of keeping your back straight. Sometimes cheating those motions could let you lift a little bit more, but it can be kind of dangerous, right? So we're not worried about form in the sense that we're like going to take apart the best ways to throw shots and how to maintain that stability. What we're concerned with is in this class is making sure that we have enough range of motion to use those positions of stability more effectively, right? You don't really need to know all of that stuff to be able to benefit from the stretches and things that I'm going to show you, but that's kind of that's the science behind what we're doing. That's why people tend to get injured, right? So you're looking to try to use a primary motor pathway instead of a secondary one. And we're trying to make sure that our tissues are open and mobile enough to use those primary motor pathways and not default to the secondary ones because our tissues are too stiff. Okay, so Rad has a question. What kind of adverse effects are we looking at for overusing secondary motor pathways? Osteoarthritis, strains or sprains? Is it something that accumulates over years or is it a shorter time frame? My understanding is that it's all of the above, but typically you're looking at RSI injuries, like repetitive stress injuries, because the secondary motor pathways work for a period of time, but they wear out kind of quickly, right? So if you're trying to bench press and you have constricted shoulders, right? You can for a while. It's like driving your car, but not oiling the car, right? Like not oiling the motor. You can do it for a little while, right? But it'll accumulate damage pretty quickly. And over enough time, yeah, osteoarthritis is kind of a thing it's definitely a thing that has happened to me. I have plenty of it from years of abuse, but mostly we're looking to try to avoid tendinitis issues, like the stuff that's going to put you out for like a series of months. And as a bonus effect of this kind of work, you're going to increase your endurance because it's a lot easier to, you expend less energy using a mobile pathway than a stiff pathway, right? So your endurance will go up. If your shoulders are particularly bad, it can be really difficult to throw wrap shots until you have like a certain amount of flexibility in your shoulder. You can increase your lunge distance by increasing your flexibility because you'll be able to lunge deeper without putting strain on your knees. So there is an effect in terms of like increased athletic performance, but I think primarily we're looking to open up those pathways and not have repetitive stress injuries when we come back. So that, moving on to our next section, I want to talk about pain real quick, right? So the natural state of the human body is pain-free, which I think is one of the things that comes as surprising to us, right? This includes stuff like standing for long periods of time, like if your back starts to hurt and joints that ache and burn after a day of practice. I'm not talking about muscular soreness, but I'm talking about like, oh man, my knee hurts, my elbow hurts. A lot of us accept those kinds of things as normal, but it's actually kind of not, right? Your body has an amazing ability to recover and heal, like if you stop trashing it. But if you have good mobility, you tend to run into those things a little bit less. And one of the problems with pain in your joints is that, and your tendons, is you tend to not feel the amount of damage that you're sustaining until you've already sustained a lot of it, right? So usually by the time you have tennis elbow, your tendon is smoked. Your body just doesn't really bother to tell you if it's a little bit of damage in that area. Yeah, it waits until you're already injured, right? So that's one of the reasons that you have to kind of pay attention to your pain and figure out like, hey, what stretches do I need to be doing to ameliorate this before this blooms into a huge problem? And it can be a little bit difficult because when you are fighting in a high adrenaline environment, right, you tend to not feel those issues until the adrenaline wears out. So that can lead to like absolutely trashing your elbow, but you're excited, you're having a good time, your adrenaline is high, your endorphins are high, and you don't realize that your elbow is like screaming until you're done and you calm down. So the next issue, the next topic that I want to talk about is upstream and downstream areas, right? So often when you have pain at a joint, it's not necessarily the joint that is the problem. The joint pain is the symptom of other problems that you have. So for example, if I have pain in my elbow, right? My elbow has tendons and stuff, but it doesn't really have any musculature inside of there. And sometimes the issue can be upstream or downstream, right? So you can get tennis elbow from issues where you have limited wrist mobility. So when you throw a wrap shot and your wrist is stiff, your elbow has to turn over more to compensate, and that can fry those tendons in there and result in tendinitis. Or if you have like a stiff tricep and you can't extend properly, that can also throw some more issues to your elbow. Not having enough internal shoulder rotation, where you're able to turn your shoulder over like this, that can also throw tension into your elbow. So if you have an issue in a joint, you want to think about mobilizing upstream and downstream. So if I'm having elbow pain, I want to think about, okay, well, what are the areas of musculature around it, right? It's my forearm, it's my tricep, it's my bicep, it's my shoulder. I want to think about stretching and mobilizing those tissues specifically to see if I could get the tension and strain off of that elbow joint. So anytime you have pain, you want to think about like what's upstream and what's downstream of this particular joint. So if you have pain in your knee, you could have tight glutes, you could have tight quads, you could have tight hamstrings, you could have tight calves, you could have tight, I forget what the name of the muscle is, but the muscle over your shin can also contribute to your knee pain. And what you do is, scroll down a little bit. So the reason that I say this is, one of the most important principles that we're going to talk about is the test-retest principle. So if you've mobilized a joint, if you mobilized a muscle properly, you should be able to notice some gains in range of motion and comfort pretty much immediately afterwards, right? This means, sometimes it means it just feels a little better, but there are some ways that I'll demonstrate where you can see visible differences after you've mobilized the joint properly. And that's a kind of a bit of a stretch where you're like, hey, I'm going to immediately feel amazing. I don't mean that you're going to heal your tennis elbow in one shot, right? But I'm going to show you some ways where you can see like, hey, I think this was the joint that was the major issue. This was the muscle that was the major issue, because you tend to build a lot of slack in that area, and you'll notice that you have increased range of motion. But you can only figure that out if you test the muscle and the range of motion initially, and then retest it after you've done the stretch to see if you have significant gains there, or a significant gain in comfort or motion. So the basic rule of mobility work that I want to tell you guys is a minimum of 2 minutes per stretch, right? Per Dr. Kelly Starrett, if you don't hold a stretch for a minimum of 2 minutes, it doesn't affect any permanent change in your tissues. Bouncing in and out of a stretch for 30 seconds at a time can be a good warm-up, in the same way that doing a bunch of squats or hopping up and down or shifting your weight around, it can do that, right? That's why you feel better when you stretch for 10, 20, 30 seconds before activity, because it functions as a warm-up. But to gain permanent mobility and change in the tissue, you have to use it 2 minutes minimum for stretching. So that kind of concludes the basic principles. So what you need to remember is upstream and downstream. If you're looking to resolve some pain, you need to figure out what muscles are upstream and downstream of the joint that you're trying to work with a little bit. You need the test-retest principle, where you want to explore the range of motion before and after you stretch to see if you found a stretch that is going to benefit you a lot. And then the basic rule of mobility work being you need to hold a stretch for 2 minutes minimum, or it just doesn't accomplish anything for you. So before I move on to materials, you guys have any questions? So Rad has a question. Stretching before or after exercise is kind of a controversial issue for people who, especially people who are kind of talking on the internet. On Kelly Starrett's YouTube, what he said was just get it done. Like, just do the stretching. Don't worry about before, don't worry about after. People talk about stretching increasing your risk of injury. Like, that probably isn't true for single sessions where you're, it's probably not true that you're going to hurt yourself in a single session by stretching beforehand. But if you like unlock some new range of motion and then try to use a range of motion that you haven't really exercised yet, yes, that can hurt you. But more or less what this guy who wrote these books says is like, just find the time to do it, because stretching is better than not stretching. It's probably not going to mess you up. I think the only exception that he talked about, that he was like, hey, don't do this, is like, don't try to mobilize your spine and then do deadlifts right afterwards, right? You want to do that like the night before or something like that. You don't want to change your spinal mechanics right before you put it under a max load of like a 405 deadlift or something like that. But for most people, it's not going to hurt you. So how often should you stretch? It depends on what you want. I do like an hour a day just to keep myself moving, because 35 is merciless. And I have a lot of physical activity that I undertake. I'll cover kind of like when to stretch, or at least when I stretch towards the end of the course. But basically, his theory was whenever you can, right? So like you should be looking to, the way he described it is you should be looking to fit in stretches through your everyday. Like as soon as you have pain, as soon as you have tightness, do the stretch right then and just accumulate lots of stretching through the day, because you have to hold it for 2 minutes, right? You don't want to block off an hour of time if you don't have to. You might do like 10 minutes at lunch if you can sneak it in between meetings. If you find a good spot where you can stretch your chest in the park, just do it right then. You know, if you want to build it into your day, because it tends to become a lot. But I'll cover more of that towards the end of the course. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is materials. Most of these materials are from Rogue Fitness. I'm going to paste the URL into the chat section of it. You can find most of these tools here. I will tell you, in cases where you should not buy them from Rogue, they can have like a name brand markup for their stuff, right? But most of this good quality items are from Rogue. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Rogue Monster Bands. So let me grab that real quick. I have two of them. It's basically a thick rubber cable, right? It's like a loop. And then I have a smaller one. It's same thing. It's green. It's a lighter poundage, right? So the black one is 100 pounds and the lighter one is 65 pounds from the Rogue store. And you're not, you can scale it up and down, but you're just using these to distract your joints into certain positions when you're stretching. You're not like trying to pull 65, 100 pounds. You're just using it to position yourself. And it's an elastic cable. It's a rubber cable, right? So you'll get, as you push harder into it, you'll get more resistance. So you don't need to overthink like, well, Tato's a big guy, I should get the 35-pound one. That will probably be too light to do some of this stuff. So I would just get the 65-pound band and the 100-pound band. For what we're going to be doing today, aside from one mobilization, we're going to just be using the 65-pound band. It can get a little bit expensive to rack up all these materials, but if you start with something, start with the 65-pound band. That's what we use for our upper body most of the time. There's only one that we use the big black band for upper body, but lower body, we use the big black band a little bit more. The second piece of equipment is the Rogue door strap. So you're gonna see me use this to hook that rubber cable into my door frame, right? I'm just basically gonna throw this part into the door frame and shut the door. And this lets me hook the rubber band in there. And that makes it so that you don't have to try to find like a pole or something or an awkward place to tie your rubber band to. It's a nice, easy, convenient way of throwing it in. So this is the Rogue door strap. There's another piece of equipment that's nice that we're not going to talk too much about. But this is a Voodoo floss band. This is a rubber, basically a rubber tape. It's a roll of rubber tape. And you use this to compress the joint down to express it through its range of motion and create like a little bit of a stretch. So I'll show you how to do that on my wrists, but you can use it on your elbows and your shoulders as well. Rad asked, can you use an exercise band for physical therapy? I think it tends to not be enough poundage, right? Because that's something that you're trying to work your musculature against. These are for pulling the bones into certain positions or help you hold certain positions while you stretch so that you don't compensate. So you need something heavier for that. And then the last material that you need to get, do not buy these from Rogue. They will sell them to you for an outrageous markup. You need lacrosse balls, right? You need 3 of them. So this is just a single lacrosse ball. It's a little dirty. Please forgive me. I've been using it for a number of years. It's kind of like a real hard rubber, right? You can't squeeze it very much. So don't get like a soft ball and think it's going to be doing the same thing. You want a hard lacrosse ball. And then this is basically a peanut that you make by using athletic tape and taping 2 lacrosse balls together. They try to sell like a custom poured like rubber peanut for like $30 or $60, something like that. And you can make this for $5 worth of lacrosse balls and athletic tape. So do that instead. So lacrosse balls and tape this one together. And then the last material that we use, you may not need this. I only use this for the first one. So this is a 35-pound dumbbell. This is only used for one item. And this is an area where you could use a little bit less weight, like a 20 or something might be appropriate for like a regular human being, but I use a 35-pound weight. Okay, so there's 2 categories that we're gonna go over. And you're gonna wanna take notes for this part because we're going to be going kind of quickly. There's two types. There's stretches and there's smashes, right? And the stretches that we're gonna go over first, They are designed to lengthen the body of the muscle, right? Smashes don't do that. Smashing, if you have a knot in a muscle that's restricting your mobility, you'll use a lacrosse ball to smash that knot out. That doesn't permanently lengthen the muscular tissue in the way that a stretch does, but it will unlock some mobility that you may have lost by having that muscle be a little bit tight, right? And I'll tell you how to figure out when to smash and when to stretch a little bit later, but the stretching tends to be the more important ones, right? And you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking like, hey, like lacrosse ball smashes and stuff like that make me feel really good. That's all I'm going to do. You need the stretches, or else all you're doing is kind of taking ibuprofen and you're not getting to the root of the pain issues that you're experiencing. So this is the only stretch that I'm going to actually perform for 2 minutes because it highlights the test-retest principle really well. You may not need to do this one. This is especially important for bench athletes. And it's basically sets your shoulders back in the socket for their position. So you have this, for any ball and socket joint that you've got, so your shoulder or your hip, you've got what's called the joint capsule. It's this fibrous, leathery sac that kind of sits over the head of the humerus or the head of your thigh bone. I forget what that's called. And what can happen is basically your human body is a loosely organized sack of meat and bones, right? You're not as structurally sound as you think you are. And from sitting, a lot of the time, the head of your humerus migrates into the front of that shoulder capsule and sticks there, right? So what we're going to do is called the shoulder distraction. We're going to move the humerus back to the back of the joint capsule. And I like to do this one first before I do any other stretches, because sometimes if I don't do this and I do a pec stretch, I could get a cramp in the back of my shoulder because my humerus is sitting forward in the joint capsule, right? So the other part that's neat about this is the test-retest protocol, right? So you're going to see that my arms are the same length right now, right? Like if I put my fists together like this, they're the same length. When I'm done with this, they're going to be different lengths because my shoulder is going to be sitting in the back of the capsule. I think this part's really neat. I hope you guys are going to be able to see this. So you take your door strap and your 100-pound cable. With a 35-pound dumbbell. And the other material that you need is just any old kitchen timer, right? I like these ones. They're magnetic. They have a little stand on them. And this is set to 2 minutes. So, can you see me? I think so. I'm going to move that down just a little bit more. Okay, so this is our test-retest, right? So you see how my fists are the same length. I hope the screen's going to be big enough for you guys to see this. But I'm going to mobilize my right shoulder first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my arm up through this rubber band, and I'm going to scoot down that way so that we get some tension here. We're pulling my arm back, right? It's going to be pretty tight. Like that, right? So there's significant tension. And then I'm going to take this dumbbell, and I'm going to hold it up like this. And I'm trying to keep my shoulder in the back of the socket. And then I'm going to start a 2-minute timer. So when you do these kinds of stretches, also I'm going to stabilize my elbow by putting this hand around here. And I'm going to rotate my shoulder a little bit. You can see the dumbbell spinning there, right? So when you're doing these stretches, you normally have to wait a couple of minutes, right? So it really helps to have something to take your mind off of how much time is passing, because it's like if you're holding every stretch for 2 minutes, it gets frustrating really quickly. So I listen to a lot of music. In cases where my hands are free, I goof around on my phone. You want to try to make sure that you're concentrating as much as you can on the muscle whilst you're mobilizing it. But some of the time you need something to take your mind off it. So when I do lower body, what I used to do a lot of the time, since it's mostly hands-free, is I would play Animal Crossing while I was doing my stretching, and that was probably the healthiest I think that my knees have ever been, right? Thanks for something, at least, Tom Nook. But so we just wait 2 minutes, we rotate slowly back and forth. And I purposely didn't do this last night so that you guys would be able to see the difference in the lengths of my arms when I'm done. So the time should go off soon. About 30 more seconds. So this is maybe socially the most uncomfortable I've ever been on a Zoom meeting before, but there's something new to experience in 2021, which is interesting and different. If you're doing this right, you should feel a bit of a stretch in the back of your shoulder, right? As the head of your humerus is shifting back into the back of the capsule. And your arm gets a little bit tired, but it's nothing too bad. So I tend to use a heavier weight because it just works a little bit faster, like a 20-pound dumbbell just doesn't push back hard enough, right? So we're gonna carefully put this down. So you see how my fists are different heights? This always cracks me up, right? That's like a full, 2-inch change. Can you see that? Yeah, it's weird, right? So the head of my humerus is sitting back a little bit further. So if you can see, and that's not with me trying to bring it back. It's pushed back, right? It's pushed back a little bit more. So that is a really important one to do for bench press because it helps you hit that position where you have your shoulders back a little bit better. But the reason I like to show that one is it's very visually different, right? My arms are different lengths. The rest of the retest ones that you're going to do they're typically by feel. How does this feel as I'm taking it through a range of motion? So that is the banded shoulder distraction. This next one that I want to talk about is the bully stretch, right? So this is where we're going to get into stuff that is actually concretely helpful for whackers and not just lifters, right? So the bully stretch, we use this name because we think about a bully who's twisting your arm like this, right? And this works on our internal rotator. So one of the things that you can look at for retest is the way that your shoulders should be situated. If you stand straight up and you point your thumbs forward, right? Just point your thumbs without rotating your shoulders or your wrists. They should point straight forward like this. So what can happen a lot of the time is people with tight rotators will have a thumb that kind of naturally points off towards the side. So that means that your shoulder is out of position. That means your internal rotator is tight. So my shoulders don't sit like that perfectly, right? My left one is fine. My left thumb points straight forward. But when I don't stretch, my right thumb starts creeping inside like that because I've put so much strain on this over the years and it gets tighter a little bit easily. So this stretch works on internal rotation, your internal rotators. And one thing that this can help with is wrap shots, right? Because a shoulder wrap shot, we're going to rotate our shoulder internally to get the angle on that shot. Well, if your shoulder is already rotated internally, when you throw, you can't achieve that internal rotation anymore with your shoulder. You have to start doing it with your wrists and your elbow, which aren't as strong. So that's why this one has some really concrete applications to fighting immediately, right? So what that looks like, so we're going to take our rope door strap, and we're going to put it in the top of the door frame. Okay, so you can see how this is hanging at the top now. We're going to take the 65-pound band and we're going to loop it around our wrist and grab it in a handful like this, right? And then we're going to put our hand behind our back and we're going to step forward. Okay, and it's basically pulling the back of my hand away from my back, and I feel a stretch right here. And when you're in this position in the bully stretch, you can kind of try to twist your body around a little bit and hunt for corners that are a little bit extra tight. And there's another thing that you can do while you're holding this stretch. This is called contracted release. So you can flex your pec and your shoulder, hold it for 5 seconds, and then release it. And you should feel a little bit of a range of motion gain from that. It's not permanent, but it lets you hit a deeper stretch, right? So this is the bully stretch. Your arms behind your back, you're stepping away from the band, and it's pulling the internal rotator cuff open a little bit and lets you have more range of motion there. So your retest, after you've held that for 2 minutes, is if you look at your thumbs, it should be sitting a little bit more straight. Now, if you've had it messed up for years, it's going to take more than one try to like get it unrotated, but you should notice some progress there. And you'll also, a good test retest for any of these is just how does it feel when I move my arm around like this? Is it looser? And the interesting part about doing one side at a time is like, it's actually a lot easier to get this arm straighter and higher than it is my left arm. Like this is about the best that I can do right now for both. And I think this shoulder is looser because I did the distraction stretch first. But you can see how like that preparation and that stretching essentially like temporarily opens up that range of motion a little bit more. And you're not going to keep everything that you gain, but you'll keep a little bit each time. So where's the band attached to me on that stretch? Was a question from Rat. It's around my wrist, and I'm holding it. Like
and
that.
Also in the other one, in the previous one, the distraction one, where was it attached to you?
The distraction one, yeah, it was probably hard to see. The distraction one, the cable was around my shoulder, like right at the top of my bicep, and it was pulling my shoulder back like that, right? Back like that.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, no problem. Working with Zoom is not fun for this, but thanks for that. All right, I'll make sure to highlight that a little bit. I'll come back to that. So that's the bully stretch, right? That internal rotator. Then there's that pec stretch, which is obviously, this is one that you guys are probably familiar with. Same wrist position, loop around, grab a good handful. And you want your palm to face up. Palm is facing up, step forward, open your stretch, open your pec up like that. And you could feel it in your chest, and you may also feel it through your bicep and the top of your forearm, right? And remember, you can hunt around for different angles to try to find a spot that you feel an especially good stretch. You could contract your release by putting like a little bit of resistance into the band. Like I'm not trying to pull it off the door frame, but pulling against it a little bit and then relaxing, right? And that opens up my musculature a little bit. It gives me a deeper stretch. And you can do that multiple times for 2 minutes. So the only thing you got to remember about the pec stretch, my hand is facing up, right? My palm is facing up. So if you don't do that and you do it facing down, you're not going to get that good stretch through your bicep. You're just going to get it in your chest. So that's pec stretch. So the cross shoulder stretch is the next one. So the rest of them, the test retest has been like this, and you should feel it open up a little bit. It's easier to reach straight up than it was before. Cross shoulder stretch, we're going to be stretching back here, external rotators, and we're going to try to open this up a little bit. The test retest is just how far can I reach across like this. So again, cross shoulder stretch. My wrist is through the band. I grab a handful of it. And now I'm going to step and try to face you guys, right? Like that. And you can kind of just feel it in the back of your shoulder and your lat, and it's going to pry that musculature open a little bit. Right behind your shoulder blade is where you should feel this. And you can hunt around for different areas of stiffness by crunching over a little bit, by facing up a little bit. So you should try to explore that motion a little bit and figure out like, hey, this is where my shoulder feels best in this stretch. You hold it for 2 minutes. It looks kind of like slamming your shoulder into something, right? And your retest for that, you reach across. It should be a little bit more comfortable to reach across like that. That's your cross shoulder stretch. It hits the back of your shoulder, parts of your upper back, and your external rotators. And then the last big stretch is the lat stretch. So we're stretching our latissimus dorsi, which is this band of muscle right here. I think typically on fighters, it's the upper chest and the internal rotators that get really tight. But you can also get really tight lats from just other hobbies mostly, but you should stretch this anyway because it also hits the external rotators and the rear head of your deltoid a little bit. And obviously your shoulder is a very unstable joint. It's kind of just hanging on by that shoulder capsule. So you need to stretch all parts of it, even though you're more likely to have chest and internal rotator tightness. So this one's a little bit harder to show you guys, but we're going to go to the same position, right? Wrist through the band, loop it around, grab a good handful of it, right? And I'm going to distract my shoulder by just stepping away from it a little bit, right? So it's kind of pulling my shoulder out of the capsule a little bit. And I'm going to try to kneel down like this on all fours and slowly push my head down. And don't compromise your core. Try to do this. Try to keep your core as straight as you can. And you should feel the stretch in the lat back there. So I'm going to try to turn towards you guys a little bit. Stretch is right here. And you can hunt around by trying to lean forward, switching your, by rotating your torso in a little bit, externally a little bit. You want to try to find the spot where you get the most stretch. I tend to get the best stretch out of the lat stretch by rotating up and out like this a little bit. You're going to feel more of a stretch here. Oh man, that feels good. I wish we had time for me to sit here like this. So that's your lat stretch. So the stretches that we covered are the shoulder distraction, banded shoulder distraction, bully stretch for that internal rotator, pec stretch, cross shoulder stretch, and then the lat stretch, which pulls my arm back this way. So those are the things that are going to free up the range of motion in your shoulders. And if you work hard on this, you'll be able to fight a little bit longer. You'll be able to throw a little bit deeper reps after a few months of sticking with it. Essentially, what you want to do is if you could, the more range of motion that you can free up in your shoulders, the less damage you'll do to your joints when you're doing a higher load, right? It's like building a car, like a sports car, and then not drag racing through the street, right? So you're increasing your maximum mobility, but you're only running your body through like a normal range of mobility. You collect less wear and tear when you do it that way. Does that make sense? Okay, so the next thing we're going to get into are smashes. So smashes are essentially, they're used for working out knots. So sometimes you'll get a clump of tissue and all you need to do is just bust it up a little bit. It's basically like, I said, have you ever had trigger point massage or deep tissue massage? Now it hurts like crap, but you feel a lot better afterwards. All smashes is how to do trigger point and deep tissue massage to yourself using a lacrosse ball and just different weird angles, right? There's nothing magical about it. It's a little bit more normal than you might suspect. These are really good for after workouts. These are amazing for recovering at night during an event and being able to actually fight the next day. Like you try to figure out where am I tight and you just use smashes to kind of open those joints back up and be ready for the next day. I use these a lot for like, eventually you kind of develop a sense as you hit different stretches and different smashes of, oh, I need this one. Oh, I need that one. So you have to kind of experiment a little bit. But I find this one to be really good for me when I have pinchy knees from doing squat jumps. I hit the top band of my knee. We're going to cover that in the other class, but this one is strictly upper body focus. But the first one I'm going to show you guys, since you guys are probably working from home, and this one I kind of discovered by accident, and it's not in his books, but I was having wrist pain because I was working as a software engineer, so I'm typing all day, and I imagine most people are typing all day right now. So this is just a thumb smash, right? So the meat of our hand right here, this is a really big, dense clump of muscle. And remember, when we have like wrist pain, we want to look upstream and downstream. So sometimes that's going to be in our forearm, but sometimes it could be in your thumb too. So all you do, take your ball. You do this at your desk, right? You just take the meat of your thumb and press down. And press down with your other hand, right? And when you sink into a tight muscle, you can kind of feel like, oh, this feels really sensitive. That means it's a spot that you probably need to work out a little bit. And especially if you feel like delocalized tension, right? So if you feel something like up in here, that means you're hitting what's called a trigger point in massage. So that's a good way to know, like, yes, this is tight. I need to work on this. Is when you have like a sensation in other locations. But you can just roll out the meat of your thumb for 2 minutes. And then the test retest is just moving your wrist around like this, right? So for some of you, that may help a lot. For me, that was like amazing. It made my wrist feel way better. If it doesn't, what you do is you just try a different smash, right? So if we're troubleshooting our wrist, we might think about like, okay, well, what's upstream and downstream of it? Well, we covered upstream is the meat of our thumb. Well, downstream is all the extensors and stuff in our forearms, right? So I'm going to show you guys 2 forearm smashes. So again, rotating our wrist. If we're troubleshooting our wrist, rotating our wrist is what we're looking at here. So there's 2 sides you can do. You can do the underside of your forearm here, and that's most easily done on a desk. You just sink that clump of muscle in, put a little extra pressure, and then just rub back and forth like this. If you find a spot, you can try to like rotate your wrist around like that. And you might feel a little bit of tension release there. And if you find like okay, so right here, I'm really tight. I don't know if you guys can see it, if the camera's close enough, but you'll see there's like as I'm rolling my arm across, there's like a sudden shift. There it is. So that means that's because that spot is really tight on me, right? It feels kind of thick and ropey. So I want to try to like massage that part and work that part out. And the other part of our forearm that we can do is the top, right? So this band of muscle up here. So this one's a little bit harder to work, and I can't show you the way that I like to do it very well, but I like to take my forearm and pin it under the table like that, right? And press it up into the underside of a flat table and then roll my wrist around. But what that looks like from a visible view, and you can do this with just your hand if you don't want to do like if you don't want to do it under the table and you want less pressure. So you just push it in real tight. You're going to roll your hand around like that, and you should be able to feel the muscle kind of like rubbing against the ball, pushing against it, getting flat and getting pushed out. So basically when you're doing a smash, you want to think about like your muscle is kind of like a piece of dough, right? And you can roll out your muscle the same way that you would roll out a lump of dough, like of bread, right? Like that's why we have foam rollers and stuff, which are a really good tool. I just don't happen to use them much. I feel like foam rollers are kind of big and dull, right? Whereas I've been an athlete for 20 years. I need stuff that really gets deep into the tissue, hurts really bad. So the foam rollers are a good basic item, but I like to use the lacrosse ball because it hits it much harder and gives me much more range of motion, much more quickly. So that's thumb and forearm. So if we're trying to troubleshoot some elbow pain, what we can look at, remember upstream and downstream. I've got upstream is our forearm. Well, downstream is our triceps, right? And this is a good one because we have the whole length that we can work on here, right? Like when you get on your forearm, there's not like quite as much musculature here, so we can't roll it out. We have to kind of stick to the muscle bellies up here, but your tricep has like 3 different heads to it. So tricep smash. You can do this with a barbell too. I really like to do this with a barbell, but you can do this with a lacrosse ball. Just put it down on the table. I like to start right at my elbow, and I put my hand across my bicep, and you push like that. You can roll it back and forth, right? You can rotate your arm out a little bit and try to hit the outside aspect of your tricep. So you're just hunting for spots that feel especially stiff, right? And you're rolling it out. And this is a great one to do at events along with the forearm smash when you're trying to recover from like a really hard day of fighting. And you could go the whole way up, right? Like you You don't have to stick it just above your elbow. You can go the whole way back to the larger part of your tricep and roll that out too. So if you have a squat rack, you can take a barbell and just sit your arm across the barbell and work your tricep out like that. And roll it back and forth like a piece of dough. So that's triceps. So there's a wall pec smash, right? I can't really show you guys that one because I would be against the wall and you guys aren't really able to move around. But essentially, you take a wall, and especially like a corner, like right here, and you're taking this ball and you're shoving it in to the outside aspect of your pec and the top aspect of your pec just under your collarbone, right? So don't shove it into your collarbone. You can't massage your bones. I mean, you can, but it's going to hurt like hell. It's not going to accomplish anything. But this pec minor is what this muscle is called. That tends to get really tight on LARP people. So you push into the wall, especially a corner where you can reach past it, and you can roll up and down like this to kind of roll your chest out. And you can also find a good spot and pin the muscle down and raise your arm up like that and get a stretch like that too. So that looks like if I step into this wall, you see I can barely raise my arm the whole way up because there's a lot of slack that's taken up by the lacrosse ball thrusting into my chest, right? So it's just a good way of getting a nice deep stretch. I probably need to do that one a little bit more often than I do it. And you can also do an internal rotator smash, which is, it's hard to differentiate on Zoom, but instead of being the outside aspect of the chest, it's the internal rotator. And you have to be a little bit more careful to not absolutely obliterate this, right? Because your pec is a real thick muscle. Your internal rotator is not quite as thick, but it's the same thing. You put your arm in that bowling position with your arm behind your chest or your arm behind your back, and you just roll up and down against it like that, and just kind of massage it out and work it out. And that will give you a really good change in that thumb position that we talked about with our shoulders back and our thumb rotated open. So I want to talk about, I think I have about like 10 minutes that I need to talk before I take questions, but we're almost through it, right? The last one, LARPers have a lot of problems with their back, and it gets really tight. And you can do stuff like downward dog and such to stretch out your back. But I like to use smashes for this to get my spine organized again. There's two. So the first one, and this is going to be tough because I can't put the ball on my body and show it to you because I'm too stacked for that. So you're going to have to trust my explanation. But we're going to take our peanut that we built and absolutely did not buy from Rogue, right? So we have this as two lacrosse balls taped together with athletic tape, right? And there's a little channel in between the balls, right? So we're going to do a thoracic spine mobilization. So your thoracic spine are the vertebrae that are connected to your rib cage, whereas your lumbar spine are the ones that are in your lower back. We're going to do that second. That's not connected to your rib cage. But when you think about a thorax, you're thinking about like an insect's like upper, like carapace, right? So this is just from right about here between the shoulder blades to down here, right where my ribs end, right? I'm not going the whole way down. We do a different stretch for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down on the ground with the ball in my back, with my spine cradled between the valley of these balls. And I'm going to cross my arms over like this to get my shoulder blades out of the way. You don't want to roll around on your shoulder blade. Again, you can't mobilize bone. It's not going to help. And then I'm going to go roll up and down and twist back and forth. So let's see how good of a view we get for this. Just going to put the ball on the ground. I'm going to rotate a little bit. And I'm going to hunt for it before I put all my weight on it, right? I'm going to make sure, like, okay, yeah, that's my spine. I'm going to cross my arms over my chest. And you can get varying degrees of weight by raising your butt off the ground, right? So I always keep my butt off the ground because I need a ton of pressure to just unlock everything, right? Because I've been lifting weights for a lot of years. I have a kind of a thick musculature. If you're not jacked, you might just need to put a little bit of weight against it. Some people who are like incredibly powerful strength athletes and are very thick, they hold a 45-pound plate like this and roll back and forth across it. But I'm basically just using my heels to drag my back up and down the ball, right? And I'll also twist back and forth. And ideally, you're going to work this for a couple of minutes, and you're going to slowly work your way down like the ball. So like right now, the ball is against the vertebrae that are right at the end of my ribs. So kind of like your middle back. So you're going to go from your upper back to your middle back, rolling the whole way up and down. And you might spend like 5 minutes on that one, because you need to hit like the musculature around each vertebrae, right? So that's thoracic spine mobilization. And then the last one is lumbar spine mobilization. So that's going to be our lower back. There's two ways to do this depending on how much pressure you need. I need a lot of pressure. You may not need a lot of pressure. So the first way is the same way that we did the thoracic spine mobilization, where your spine column is resting in the valley of the ball, right? And you would put it right here in your lower back. The other alternative, if you need more pressure, is if my arm is my spine, instead of placing the ball like this, we can place the ball like this. So around your spine are two columns of muscle, right? So this way we would place the ball against the one column of muscle instead of two columns of muscle simultaneously, right? And roll them back and forth. I'm going to show you the non-heinous version that doesn't, it's not the one that I use, but it works pretty well. So we're just going to put the ball back here like this and try to get some weight on it. So this one you can just slip under your spine, and then you might want to you can raise yourself up on your elbows a little bit and roll back and forth to get more pressure. If you don't want to go that hard, you can just lay down against the ball and move back and forth. You can twist your legs like this, like stabilize for your elbow, twist your legs to shift back and forth over the ball like that to massage that lower back. So if your back gets really stiff at the end of the day of fighting, a lot of people do that money shot, that real low shot, and then tweak their backs. This is a nice way of massaging your back to life after the end of the day. All right, so the key smashes for upper body: thumb smash, forearm smash on the inside and outside aspects. Tricep smash down the length of the whole muscle. Typically, you want to work around here is where a fighter is going to get tight. A lifter might get tighter here, right? Where you wall pec smash around the chest. You can do internal rotator smash on the inside of your shoulder. And then the thoracic smash, which is from here to here. We're going to work on my spine, and the lumbar spine mobilization, which is down here. So you want to do smashes usually to recover from workouts or prep for them, right? So some of the time I'll use a suprapatellar pouch smash, which is just that area above your knee. If I'm going to do like a lot of squat jumps or something like that, so you could prep for stuff that way. Like if you have some hard fights coming up, you could get your triceps smashed in to like unglue those muscles to just not have to deal with the pinching, right? That can resolve some of the pinching when you're fighting. You can also use it to unglue musculature that gets tight after a long day of fighting. So those are kind of like an anytime thing, but you have to understand that if you're going to use like a smash right before you lift weights or something like that, you're probably not going to be able to lift as well because it's tiring, right? And it's going to make things less tight. But for something that's like an endurance sport, it's probably not going to mess you up. Just don't do like a lumbar mobilization and then go deadlift, right? So in that case, you would want to do it afterwards to unglue things, right? So I tend to do that the night before. For stretching, So I think stretching, I typically do it the day before I work out. I'll make sure that I hit the appropriate stretches the day before, or I won't go. Like if I go into a gym and start benching without doing my shoulder distraction, my pec stretches and that kind of stuff, I'll usually get hurt in about 2 weeks of messing around like that, right? Like you don't want to mess around and find out on that one. But that's a good thing to do the day before. I think it's also appropriate, like if you're going to do like a big warlord style tournament where you're going to be in it, it's okay to do these stretches before. I would do it a couple of hours before you try to compete, right? I wouldn't do it and then go compete. I would do it a couple of hours because you're going to have like all this newly freed up range of motion, but new range of motion usually isn't strong is the problem there. Right? So if you're hitting like the bottom of the squat, but you're brand new to it, the bottom of your squat's not going to be stable. So is there anything, it's a question for Jamie. Is there anything specific for golfers or tennis elbow injury? So like, I want to make it clear, like this is not a replacement for going to your doctor or going to a physical therapist when you're injured. This is specifically to prevent injury, right? In the back of this book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, there are, let me go to the back of it. So this is a general lunge archetype mobility prescription. There are quote unquote prescriptions that you can use to try to remediate those injuries, but that's not going to heal you, right? Like tennis elbow takes time, and there's other things that can happen that may not be mobility restriction stuff. Some of it can be muscular imbalances, right? And when you've smoked a tendon, the blood supply to tendon is less than your musculature, right? So it takes months for that to heal. So if you think that you have like tennis elbow now, you should see a physical therapist to try to get a prescription. You should not try to like fix it yourself with these stretches. But like if you're if you think you might be like heading down that road and you don't think you have really bad tennis elbow yet, you can try some of these stretches to see if you can like avoid that path. What's safe to do if you have tennis elbow now? Try to work on your pec, try to work on your shoulder, try to work on your forearm, try to work on your tricep to loosen it up a little bit, but it's not going to heal your tennis elbow. It may help you stop trashing it, but you do have to let that heal, and it won't correct the muscular imbalances that may have created that in the first place. So it's kind of like a mixed yes. This stuff won't help you, right? It won't heal you, but it will help you prevent those injuries and sometimes help prevent them from getting worse. And I would, if you have like tennis elbow, I would avoid stretching your elbow directly with like an overhead tricep mobilization or like by hyperextending your bicep. I wouldn't hit that tendon directly. I might try some of the safer stretches in the surrounding area while it heals to see if I can correct some of the systemic issues that may have resulted in an injury. But don't be like, yeah, I got tennis elbow, like I'm gonna stretch my elbow. Don't do that. Does that make sense? Step 1, see a doctor. Step 2, look upstream and downstream of the injury and see if there's some problems that you can resolve, and wait the 3 to 4, 5, 6 months that it takes for the tennis elbow to heal. That would be my recommendation. Number 1 is definitely see a real doctor. So I'm just a coach. Okay, do you guys have any other questions? I think, did I miss one? Yeah, so for traps and neck, you can use the ball. I think it's best to use a barbell in a squat rack, right? And you lay it down, you put some weight on it, like 90 pounds, and you stand up and lift the bar off and then roll it up and down or pin it and go up and down like this. But you can take a ball to a lesser extent and find a corner, right? And you sit your head past the corner and use the corner of the wall to drive it in here and roll up and down. I think I could show you. Yeah, I can show you down there. You take it here. I'm going to place it right here. I'm going to push just a little bit this way. I'm gonna roll up and down like that. That's one I do pretty commonly. And then for other spots in your neck, you can use the ball to pin down. I don't remember what this part of the muscle is called, but it's this one right here. You can use it, you can tack that tissue down by pushing the lacrosse ball into the muscle. Don't push it into your throat, right? And then twist a little bit to take up some of the extra slack and stretch back like this, right? You'll notice that I can lean my head back like this, no problem. But when I take the ball, push it into the muscle and twist, I can only lift my head like this far before I get a good stretch, right? So it makes it a little bit easier. So that's for the front. And then you can do, let's see if I, what's that? I had toys everywhere, but this is I forget what this is called. It's like a yoga ball. If you have pain in the back of your neck, you can put this back in like the notch behind your skull, right? And just roll your head back and forth like this to kind of massage those areas. You can use a softball for that. A softball is the right size. I covered mine with tape. These softballs tend to be a little bit slippery, but that's some ways that you can do your neck. I would really recommend picking up the book because this is very basic and the book has a ton of variations on all of these, as well as the theory behind it, the instructions, more detailed information on how to troubleshoot, right? It's a 500-page book, so I can't cover that in an hour, right? That's like a whole semester worth of classes. But I would definitely try to pick up the book. Do I have any financial disclosures? What?
You don't have stock in this book or anything like that.
Well, I do in Rogue Fitness because I mentioned them by name a bunch of times, right? I should buy stock in those guys. I'd be like, yeah, this is going to fix your tennis elbow. It's going to heal you. And just pay me more money.
Great.
I'm not going to try to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce that neck muscle name.
The sternocleidomastoid.
Yeah, that's why I'm not going to say it. So I believe you. All right, do you guys have any other questions? Anybody?
No other questions.
The humorous stretch was not as funny as promised. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. It's muscles. It's boring. Like, it's boring. The humorous is the upper arm bone.
I like it, Swisher.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, like, when you're at big events, talking to and fighting other warlords, people who are really at the top of their game, do they do things like this? Or if they don't, what do you think are some of the differences between you and them?
This is one of the differences between me and other high tier fighters, is I think a lot of these guys don't do this stuff, but that has to do with a couple of different things. I'm shorter than most people. I have to step further than most people do. So I'm essentially like pushing my body a little bit harder to achieve the same kind of distance and range control that they can. I'm also a weightlifter in my spare time. So like my muscles tend to get a little bit tighter than other people's do. And part of it is, frankly, a lot of people just don't take care of themselves, so they haven't looked into this stuff. One reason that I've looked into these items so heavily is because I have hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's specifically, and you don't heal as well when you have that. So I've had injuries very frequently, right? So I've had to like kind of research like, hey, how can I prevent this from happening? Because I'm more susceptible to that. I think that I would imagine that all top tier fighters would agree that flexibility is very important. And if you don't have good mobility, you're in trouble. But I think people exist on different thresholds of natural mobility. Mine's not as high as like Brett's or Anatol's is, right? Anatol does do some yoga. The reason that I like this stuff over yoga is they'll take you through a whole yoga routine and you'll stretch everything. But my problem is my internal rotators, right? I want to know how to work on just my internal rotators. I don't want to do P90X 90 minutes of yoga. I want to do the 20% of things that give me 80% of the results and just fix my chest. That's why I'm not like a yoga guy. But anything that you do for your flexibility and mobility is going to help you ward off injury. It can also, when you have gotten a lot of range of motion freed up can impact your game positively and make you a better fighter too, because you have more options that you can express.